Right, so, Jerry Stevenson, thank you for being here, sharing your knowledge with us.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so, crikey, it was a few years ago when we did a little podcast, didn't we?
Yeah.
What, 4 years ago?
Don't ask me that. Ask me.
It was a while. It was a while ago.
It was, yes.
I was thinking about the type of things that would be good for young musicians to sort of know. You know, the type of things that when you know, if you were starting out now, what sort of things would you really want to know about? So I've been toying around with this, and I thought you'd be a really good person to chat to, because you've done a lot of stuff over a period of time.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, for people who don't know what you've done, some of the things that, you know, who you've played for and what you've done.
Okay. Well, I'm very much, what can I say, very much below the surface, I suppose. I've worked with Chris Rea for a couple of years. I spent a long time in Barbara Dickson's band, which was a wonderful band, I have to say, and she's a wonderful singer. I've done recording sessions. I did a whole album with Procul Harum. I did a track with Elton John's producer Gus Dudgeon for the Beach Boys, which was good. Yeah, they weren't there, but yeah, it was nice to do that. It was Crocodile Rock, actually.
Oh right, blimey!
All the guitars on Crocodile Rock. Yeah, with Barbara, I played for private party for the Queen at Windsor Castle. You know, just a load of random stuff, but mostly I just gigged for years and years and years. When I wasn't doing other things, I was constantly gigging, mostly with a three-piece.
So, what was the name of the three-piece?
Well, there were two bands. One was Gambler, which I was with Gambler all through the 80s, and still doing gigs with Gambler while I was doing the other things. And then I hooked up with Bob Jenkins, the drummer from Barbara's band, and Andy Brown, who was the bass player, and we had a band called B Sharp, and we were doing a lot of stuff, a lot of music we liked. Probably not all that mainstream, but a lot of music we liked, and we did that up until lockdown. So that's quite a long time.
Obviously, a lot of people were sort of Kent, South London type of thing. A lot of people know those bands, don't they? So, and obviously there'll be some people that would, if they lived in London or something, they probably would have heard of you with those things. What we were talking about earlier is that what's going on now musically compared to what was happening, 20, 40, 30, 40 years ago. With, you were mentioning like numbers of venues, who's doing the promotions now.
Yeah.
What is it that's the difference, and what do we need to sort of find again within music in order to generate interest. So you said an interesting thing about promoters.
Yes, I think that there was back in my day, when I started, every town had a huge number of pubs that all put on bands. Everybody could get a start, no matter what kind of music you liked. You could be in a band and you could go and play, even if you'd only been playing a few months, you could play rhythm guitar or whatever, and go and play in working men's clubs or bands. Everywhere had bands. And I think I said to you, where I grew up, near Dartford. I think at one point there were 20 pubs in Dartford, and nearly all of them put on bands.
Yeah.
So
And I can verify that.
yeah. So that's part of the fact that music was still considered special by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And with the advent of streaming and virtually free access to music, I think a lot of people have forgotten how important it can be in their life. And a lot of people have never really found a form of music which speaks to them. And so they've never really known what it's like to be totally enveloped in music, because it's also disposable. You know, you can play half a track and go, oh no, skip on. Whereas when it was vinyl,
you bought the album.
You bought the album, or someone came around with the vinyl and said, oh, you've got to hear this, and you put it on, and you go, I'm not really sure, but you don't just take it off and hop tracks. You play it end to end, and by the time you played one side, you were starting to get it.
Yeah.
Even if you'd never heard that stuff before.
Yeah, exactly.
It was starting to speak to you.
Yeah.
That's something which has been lost.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So that getting an album and putting it on was an experience.
Yeah.
Right. It was a musical experience, but it was also an artistic experience, because you had the album cover, you had the sleeve notes.
Yeah, of course.
And the album covers were works of art in many cases, weren't they?
Yeah,
And
the artists were paid handsomely for their wonderful work.
And it was also understood that the album cover could sell a massive quantity of albums, even if nobody had even heard of the album, because you'd be flipping through and it'd be like, oh, what's this? You know, so a good album cover could make or break an album, couldn't it?
Yeah. As you said, the whole thing was an experience. It wasn't. You bought the album, you took it home, you looked at the cover. If it was a fold out, you'd open it up, you'd look at the lyrics, you'd take out the record, it'll be in another sleeve, you'd take it out. You've got to treat it with respect, because you can't risk scratching it, you know. So the whole thing is a very delicate and respectful process, and that adds to the experience of listening to the music. That's one of the things that I think vinyl brings, disregarding any sonic benefits, the experience of vinyl.
It's interesting, because there's a lad that I taught who's got a band that gig a lot in sort of London, and they only record onto vinyl.
Yeah.
Which I think is very interesting.
It is. Yeah.
They have done the sort of, you know, uploading stuff, and they're taking everything down. And the whole point about making the music of value, so you could only buy that from a gig, or you could only buy that from a particular series of places, and you couldn't just get it off the internet. For a band whose players are 18 or 19, is very interesting. They're also playing rock music, so maybe that goes with the style of the music. I don't know whether that's part of it for them or not. But I do think it's an important thing about bringing some sort of value back, because it's been devalued, as you say, because you can download something and it just doesn't. You're not paying very much for anything, are you? Whereas in the past you had to save your money up to buy an album. It wasn't a cheap thing to go and buy an album. You had to, it was expensive. So I definitely think that's a point, what you're saying about that. My point is that when people download their stream, they often don't know what it is they're listening to. Yeah. And obviously, I teach a lot of kids, and if I ask them, what do you listen to, and they go, sort of vague. It's like, well, do you not listen to music? And some of them actually don't, weirdly, or they think they don't. It's not obvious to them that, because obviously they're surrounded by music. But it's more of the case that they actually don't know who they're listening to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point is, well, if you're in, if you want to become a musician, how would you feel if somebody was listening to your music and they didn't know it was you?
Yes.
And it's a wake-up call for a lot of kids because they've not even thought that.
Mm.
It's sort of blindingly obvious, but they haven't arrived at that point yet. So that's one of the points I think that's really important. So somehow we've got to do something with that. I think young musicians have got to think about how that experience of playing music is interfacing with an audience.
Yes, and that. Sorry, I didn't mean to
No.
cut you off. But that was the point I was very circuitously coming round to.
Yeah.
Is that when there were venues everywhere, you could walk into a pub and you could be enveloped in something, and every band had their own sound, and you'd walk in and they all sounded different, and some things would immediately touch you, and that happens with live music in a much more powerful and incredibly deep way than it does when you're listening to something recorded.
Yes. Absolutely.
And when I started to play, I went to a school dance, and I walked in, and there was a band playing at the school dance, and it was like being struck by lightning. I thought, that's what I want to do. And it was an absolutely defining moment. And that's very, very hard to get from recorded music.
You can't get that from recorded. I don't think you can get that from recorded music, apart from listening to a song, listening to something in your bedroom and pretending that you are the guitar player. I think that is the only other thing.
I've done that.
Yeah, exactly. And most guitar players have, interestingly. So this is interesting because there was a friend of mine who was a bass player, and he told me that he went and saw a band at the Temple Hill, right? So Dartford again. He walked in, and there were a punk band playing. He looked at the bass player and thought, I could do that.
Yeah.
And he went and got himself a bass guitar. And I thought, yeah, because that was the same thing I've heard with people about early rock and roll. I have friends who said the same thing. They saw that and thought, I want to do that. I can do that. Because it wasn't like they were playing jazz, you know what I mean? That was that sort of niche of time where you could do this thing, you could see it was possible. Now, I'm just wondering whether that's another thing. There's a disconnect about the reality of music. Because if you listen to stuff now, it doesn't even sound like real people playing anymore. Certainly vocals.
No.
They sound like some sort of weird...
Yeah, that's the dreaded auto-tune.
The dreaded auto-tune, exactly. It sounds sort of some sort of cybernetic thing,
And just as a side, I mean, it's appalling, but they're taking classic recordings of Queen and Eric Clapton and people like that and remixing them and auto-tuning the vocals on it. You just think, what are you doing? Do you not understand that? It's just shocking. But anyway...
But I think
really digressing.
Yeah, but there's a point here. You mentioned to me before about the emotional, and you've said this about seeing a band and it being a visceral thing when you walk in. Because I actually think, well, I think we both think this actually, that the emotional aspect of live music is the key.
Yes, and if there's going to be anything that revitalises it, it's going to be bands that perform and truly express themselves, not pretending to be Steve Vai or Stevie Ray Vaughan or anything. They need to be actually saying something of their own.
Yes.
When people come into the venue, wherever it may be, even if it's the corner of a pub, with minimal equipment, those musicians need to be presenting something of their own that you just can't get anywhere else.
Exactly. So this is classic marketing, is it not? You can't oversupply. There's got to be a demand for what you need, but there's got to be a rarity about it.
Yeah.
In other words, if it's a live performance, you're only there for the period of time that you're playing. Period, right? And of course that would have always been the case with music before we could record it. You could not hear that anywhere else other than the performance. Right? So that's my argument of why when people do something that they've already recorded it, they should do it differently when they play live, because why not? You know, why should it be just like the recording that you've got at home? Because somebody can just listen to the damn thing at home. So I think that the live aspect of music and how people perform, how they give of themselves in a performance, that makes that unique. Also, psychologically, this mirror neuron thing, right, which is the thing that makes if you yawn in a room, somebody else yawns.
Oh, right. Normally at my gigs.
yeah. Well, no, not your gigs. But you know, there's that sort of thing. If somebody does something, there is this sort of sympathetic effect that happens, and that is something that we're wired in because we're social creatures for that to happen. So if you see a band that are performing, truly performing, then there is an effect in the audience of that out there.
Yeah,
if they're just
proper connection. There's an actual thread that runs.
Absolutely, and it is that sort of thing. Now, this really, I think, you know, proves the point about you don't just regurgitate something. You do something in a way that expresses you, and it could be your own music, but you could be your take on a piece of music by somebody else, right? But you actually give a performance, and I think that is part of the answer to this. You know, in that when you go to see a live band, you want to see them perform.
Yeah, because the a performance is athleticism is necessary for some art forms.
Yes.
You know, you have to be in command.
Yes.
Of what you're doing to put across a certain selection of ideas. However, you don't have to be a musical god.
No.
To be able to communicate emotion.
No, you don't.
Listen to a lot of old recordings of blues players and.
Right. So we were talking about. You mentioned about blues players and stuff
Yes,
like that, right?
yes. Only for an example.
Yeah, no, it's a good example, a really good example. So, technicalities amongst blues players, right?
Well, for some of the best and most emotional players, they're not particularly.
No.
They're not particularly good.
No.
But when they play, they mean every flipping note.
Exactly.
And that's the difference. They're not just thinking. If I play a big flurry of notes here, that's going to impress people. That's not where they are.
No.
Where they are is every note actually counts. It's an emotional contribution to the solo and the song. And I'm digressing, unfortunately. Sorry, I don't.
You were going to tell me.
I was going to just digress.
So about Peter Green.
Well, yeah. I mean,
You've got to tell that story because it's.
No, not again. I've told it before.
No. You were saying about the fact he could play one note.
Yes. Yes. I was lucky enough to be present when he was thinking of returning to live music, and my band was pressed into service as his backing band, and he came along not having played. His fingernails were like this. He hadn't played at all. He had a borrowed guitar, and we started playing a 12 bar, you know, thinking we were the bee's knees, and he asked me to play a bit, and I played a bit, played as best I could to impress him, and then, you know, it was his turn to play something, and he just went "Dong," and it was just filled with something extra. There was something, and he didn't play very much at all. In fact, he probably couldn't have played very much at all because he hadn't played for such a long time. His fingers were probably like, you know, pieces of white bread, you know, in with no calluses or anything, but there was something in the way he attacked it, the choice of note, the vibrato. It was a terrible lesson for me, I just felt that big, I still feel that big when I listen to some players. So there's that Peter Green story, but what I was going to say was I don't think watching other players on YouTube is particularly helpful.
No.
Because it doesn't matter how long you live, they'll always, and how much you practice, there will always be someone that's better than you.
Yes.
And it can be demoralising.
Yes.
And music shouldn't be about that anyway. It's not a technical exercise.
No.
Technique can be a tool that will enable you to express yourself better, but that's all it's for.
Yes.
It's not for its own sake.
No.
And the trouble with watching a lot of YouTube stuff is you get so impressed and, the jaw like this, when you see a 7-year-old, kid from Asia somewhere sort of playing something absolutely ridiculous that there's no way you're going to be able to play in a million years.
No.
But
the other interesting thing about that is, and you probably experienced this as well. I've met a couple of kids. I mean, when I was about 20 or so, there was a kid who was in a band. He was like 13, and this guy was absolute mustard. And he just thought, this guy is going to be the next great whatever. Never heard of him.
Mm.
He didn't become anything.
Well, I've got a theory about that too, and I'm going to digress once more, and then we'll get back on point, sorry. But my theory is that, and I've known people that are naturally gifted and seem to get the ability from somewhere else. And the thing is, the reason that you don't hear of them, again, is because it hasn't cost them anything.
Good point.
It hasn't cost them anything. The people that actually take it somewhere are the people that are just put in blood, sweat and tears
Yep.
to develop their art.
Yep.
If it comes too easily, it's meaningless. It's
That's
a bit
a
like
very-
the free music.
Yeah. Very. I totally agree from a teaching point of view. The people that go on to do really amazing things are the ones who are the tortoises, not the hares. And they plod along, and you just think, he's doing. If they're doing grades, it's like, he's now grade 5. This kid, it's almost like they creep up on you.
Mm.
They're not the ones that you sort of think, like, wow. And it's very interesting that they have to sort of, over a long period of time, it's sort of like it matures somehow with those sort of players. And I would say that's always been my experience.
Mm.
So, as you say, the ones that take the time seem to go and take that, they can then go on to express themselves in a particular way.
And I'm going to now, in a very cunning fashion, I'm going to take this full circle back to the venues.
Mm.
Because the venues that actually are run not just for profit but for love are the ones that always do the best.
Yes.
The ones where the people that love music, they can't necessarily play, maybe they play a bit, but they love to put bands on. It's a massive part of their life. They invest themselves emotionally in progressing and advertising the venues, and the enthusiasm that they generate. Oh, you've got to come next week. Have you heard of so and so? Oh, you've got to come and see them. It's
same about the venues.
it's the same. It's another facet of what we were saying about the musicians. Everything to do with a music venue requires the same amount of passion, really, to make it work.
Yeah.
And that's what's been lacking for a long time.
Yeah.
That's why not so many people go and see bands in pubs, because they don't feel there's a bit of a disconnect. The pubs are putting a band on maybe because they think they should, not because they love having them.
Yeah.
And the venues, that actually do love having bands are still busy.
Yes. Well, we were talking about this sort of cyclic thing that happens where you get the two venues in a town that consistently have live music, and then you get these other pubs open to live music because they can see these people have got an audience, and of course that eventually over time that audience dissipates because it's the same people going to different venues, and then they stop having live music, but the original ones keep going. These people, as you say, they're invested in the idea, and people know, well, if you want to go and see a live band, well, there's going to be one at the whatever, Red Lion or something, whatever. So you would go to those places, not necessarily these other outlying places, which probably those pubs aren't really suitable for live music because they might not have a place that you could put a live band on anyway. So you get people crammed in a corner and all the rest of it. So the live venues, and also if you've got a venue that's trying out lots of different music, that gives people a chance to play, doesn't it? Gives young bands a start.
Very hard for them to do that now.
And it's very difficult for them to do that. And of course we've always been very lucky here in the UK that we had lots of live venues. Now, I did some work over in Athens, and I can remember them, just sort of doing some examining out there for sort of contemporary guitar. And I can remember them saying that there's virtually nowhere for live music. Okay, if you've got some bouzouki players and stuff, it's part of the tourist thing. But if you wanted to put a rock band, on, there was probably about 2 places in Athens, 2 or 3 places. I mean, it looks like. But I said, there's only 2 places in London to have live music.
Well, there almost is now.
Well, yeah, that's true. But so they were always interested in the fact that there would have been, you could have had a band in the local pub in the village.
Yeah.
To them, that was amazing, But to us, that was like, well, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what made the UK music scene so good, because it could be a village hall.
Yeah.
And obviously the village, the dance on a Sunday night or Saturday night type of thing. So yeah, that's definitely something where we need more venues and more places wanting to put music on.
I think it's going to be down to the musicians, though.
Yes.
They're going to have to revitalise this. They're going to have to find the venues, the village hall, and put themselves on, and maybe. If their gig goes well, then maybe they can consider booking the hall and putting some mates on another time.
Yes.
Everybody needs to work to rebuild it because it's definitely fallen into disrepair.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Well, I used to be in a band that we'd have our own support act.
Yeah.
So when we'd go and get a gig somewhere, it wasn't just us, there was another band as well. Or there'd be a duo or something, which made it easier. Sort of, if you were in a small venue, you didn't have a load of gear change stuff going on.
Yeah.
But that was always a good thing because it was like they were getting more for the, more bang for their buck, if you see what I mean. And it also gave support acts a chance to try stuff out because we'd have, a few support acts that would work with us. Which was good, and it also gave us a chance to have a different audience because they would bring people along, so it's all that type of thing. So that's sort of thinking in a bigger way. Again, I think this is an important thing. I think that's something that we need to sort of get back to.
I don't think. I think it's going to have to be the way things are at the moment. I think it is going to have to be the musicians and the people they're associated with that believe in them that are going to have to.
I think you're right.
To try and resuscitate this live music thing, and give the chance for people to come along and actually hear something that they're not going to hear anywhere else.
No, that's right.
I think it might be a difficult thing, but that's what young musicians are going to have to aim for, because there isn't an infrastructure anymore. When as we were saying, when I started out, everything was done by word of mouth. There was no internet, no nothing. You just got recommended, or as a player or as a band, you got recommended to a venue, or you went in and asked, and there were enough places to play and a network of venues. But that's all disappeared, and it's all becoming very much a lowest common denominator. Right, pub will book you, but they'll only book you if you play a certain selection of songs.
Yeah.
Do you do Sex on Fire?
Yeah.
Do you do Mustang Sally?
Yeah.
Do you, there's nothing wrong with any of those things at all, but it's the loss of the spirit to go and hear something new. It's a sense of adventure, musical adventure.
Well, interestingly, we used to do a lot of our own gigs because we did our own material. And okay, the Medway Towns was full of places where you could play. But if you could put your own gigs on and be more entrepreneurial, that was a good thing. So it's not like we're coming up with this idea that's never been done before. Because we were always doing it anyway.
Seems to have died out though, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because I think, again, there's a few reasons I think for this. There was more of a, do-it-yourself attitude back in the day, because you couldn't just go and buy something. You couldn't just go and fix a problem by buying a new one. You had to. It's a mindset, right?
Yeah.
Everything that you had, it was hard to come by, and it gave you that sort of thing of if anything needed to be done, you had to do it. And I do think that has slipped away somehow in our mindset, not our mindset, but I mean socially, in a mindset. So if you wanted to play, you organised the gigs, or if somebody didn't want you because you weren't going to play Mustang Sally, you had to work out a way that you could get around the problem. You didn't just give up. You'd think, oh, well, we'll learn Mustang Sally, but we're going to do it this way, type of thing. It would be a different thing, right? Instead of just kicking out the same things that everybody else was doing. So I think personally, there is that thing of people needing to be more creative, and this has always been my point about what are we doing about creativity. We need to solve problems in a different way, and I think it's really important now. So, next point, we mentioned this earlier before we started recording, choice, right? My point is there's too much choice now.
Well,
I think. How do we get around that? How do we get it so that we make it so compelling that people want to go and see live music? What do you think? What do you think is the?
That's really difficult, because I think one of them. Well, it goes back to a degree, but what we were saying earlier. But you need to give people something that they're not going to get anywhere else. Obviously, you need to convince them to listen to it in the first place. And we live in a world where we're flooded with advertising of all kinds, and you can't open your phone or any social media without all kinds of stuff popping up, which is only there for a split second, and then you can't find it again, even if you wanted to see what it was. You're scrolling through going, where's that? And all of these algorithms are constructed in such a way to keep you scrolling, to keep you, and all of that is designed to flood you with a load of choices, which make it very, very hard to find anything specific,
Yeah.
and that becomes part of the mindset in a way. You're used to not being able to easily track down the kind of thing that you like. Or it's very easy to track down certain things, but it's not. I've kind of talked myself into a corner here. I think
no. I get what you're saying, because it is this sort of thing where your attention is being grabbed away from you all the time.
Yeah.
Now, we've got a culture of people that are being manipulated, because that's really what's going on. You can't really think for yourself because you're being bombarded by a lot of stuff coming from outside that's similar to something that you've chosen before, right? So you're in a sort of an echo chamber, really, of your own design. Right?
Yeah.
What live music offered, I think, in the past was the unexpected.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You'd go and see a band and think, okay, I don't really like such and such music, and suddenly a band would come on and you think, holy shit, that's amazing. These are fantastic. I didn't even know I liked this sort of stuff. And that was a common experience, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And bands that were really good at performance, that could do, there was a band in the Medway towns called the Killer Rabbits. And they were a little bit like the Bonzo Dog Doodle band, really.
Oh, yeah.
So it's that sort of, but they're all dressed up and what have you. So their songs were sort of comedy songs, but they were great musicians as well. And I remember seeing them in a tiny little pub in Chatham somewhere. They were just incredible. Some guy dressed up as a rabbit, somebody else dressed up as I don't know. But they were brilliant. But the point was, I'd heard of them, but I hadn't heard of anything that they'd done. Because again, short of hearing something on the radio, like some sort of Medway, there was a program called Kent Rocks that used to occasionally hear, these bands. I'd heard a lot about them, so when I sort of turned up and saw them, it was a complete experience, because I had no idea what they were going to be like. But they were fabulous. Well, you're not going to get that if you go and see a live act and the the performances are exactly like the recording, so you could stay at home. I can't see the point of that apart from the light show. And just sort of seeing these dots on stage, thinking, oh, yeah, that's them, and they're playing that song. My take on live performance is a bit like the sort of Led Zeppelin thing. You don't know where Led Zeppelin are going in this song, because every night is different. And the same with Hendrix and all this stuff. I'm not into this idea of you turn up and it is just like the record. For me, it just is like, well, yeah, great, but it's just like the record. Fine, brilliant. What's that saying? I think the performance is the important thing. So again, drawing the analogy with actors, you can't just regurgitate the words. You've got to get into character and speak that. You mentioned about, we sort of skirted away from this, but technique and what is it that people actually know, these old players. It's quite possible that anybody coming out of a music college at this point in time knows far more than most of the great guitar icons and keyboard icons.
Yeah.
Even some of the jazz players. Because I know some stories from jazz guys where some of the great names in jazz, they were playing by ear. They didn't know what scale they were playing. They had no idea. But they knew those notes worked, right? But we've got this sort of mindset again. It's, Art Tatum was playing such and such a mode over the sun. Well, he probably didn't know. Probably had no idea. Right?
No, he was thinking of his playing note by note, and proper improvisation is when you play something and you don't think, what lick can I play next?
No.
You think, not note can I play next? What can I generate next? That's proper improvisation.
Well, there is actually a Miles Davis quote, isn't there? Like, there is no right or wrong note until you play the next one. So you can play a note that's completely but the next note makes that other note in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it comes down to, well, what is the musician hearing in their head? You know, as you say, it's not a lick. Well, it could be a lick, but it's generally not. They're hearing a vocabulary in that moment. You know, this note, they can hear that note, and then they hear this note, and so it goes on. And again, that is an experiential thing, I think, of playing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very hard to expect very technical music to be easily accessible.
Yeah. That's right.
So you have to temper that. If you want to use an incredible vocabulary of difficult stuff within your music, you have to frame it in such a way that everybody can get something from it. Otherwise, you're going to marginalise a lot of your listeners.
Oh yes.
And you know, that's
definitely.
So you know, if you're trying to what I'm trying to get at is, I'm very sorry, people. I think the technique should be a vehicle for an emotional expression, and it should be used for emotional reasons, not for its own sake.
Yeah.
So even if people hear a flurry of notes that they actually couldn't understand on an intellectual level, it will do something to them on an emotional level.
Yeah.
That's where the technique is valid.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're doing a lot of things for its own sake, and not everyone will be interested in that.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me something about your experience of networking, because obviously you've worked with a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm not. I'd love to say I'm the person to ask, but I'm not, because I'm extremely bad at pushing myself forward.
Yeah, but I think you have worked with people, so the point is that your networking wasn't a conscious, considered thing.
No.
You didn't think, I am now networking, right?
No.
Because I think that's a problem. Because in colleges they do this thing about, no, you need to go out and network. It's like, well, if they just said to people, you just got to get on with people and be really, nice and, go out and meet people for a beer. You're not considering it as networking, it's just actually making friends.
Yeah, that's really important. I know I have a mate, don't see him all that often, but I have a mate who has done all kinds of high profile stuff, and he is, whoever he's with, he's the right man for the job.
Yeah.
He fits in.
Yeah.
He fits in, he knows how to fit in, he's got the common touch, he can talk to anybody. That's the best way to do roots networking, is as you say, just be
nice.
a nice guy to be with.
Exactly.
A nice person to be with.
Yes, exactly.
And then people will go, oh, you should try him, he's a great bloke,
Yes. Yeah.
That's the old school thing. All of the stuff that you're forced to do now, it seems, the self-promotion that you're forced to do now, not everybody finds that easy. I don't find it easy at all. I'm terrible at pushing myself forward for anything. So, but it seems that that's become more and more necessary.
Yeah, I mean, because there's certain things that don't exist anymore which were important back in the day, like the local paper.
Yeah.
You could put an advert in the back of the local paper and people would see it. That doesn't exist anymore, so that's been taken over by social media, basically, isn't it? And I suppose the nearest to the local paper is Facebook in local groups, when you've got the local village, town Facebook page.
Tunbridge Wells Music.
Yeah, exactly. So that is our equivalent of the local rag, isn't
Yeah.
it? So in a way, that's made social media and all that sort of stuff has dissipated the ability to be able to get a message out there, unless you can sort of go, okay, we're going to post on this, or whatever. But generally, you can't just go to the one place, which is the local page type of thing. Get a thing that there's a gig on, or you're teaching or whatever. You can't. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
right?
no, they're not really one central. I think there are.
Or even Melody Maker.
There are websites that bands in town and
Yes.
websites like that kind of half fill
Yeah.
that.
Like Time Out, I suppose. The Time Out. But again, Time Out was a magazine. If you wanted to go somewhere in London, you bought that, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I think that, so, because I'm quite passionate about this thing about what do young musicians do now in order to make something, to start getting their music out there. And of course, there is another dimension to this, which is there are now colleges turning out a lot of musicians that you think, oh, okay, so you've now got a lot of people out there who considered themselves as musicians, slightly bewildered about how they're going to make this thing happen, because I think that's actually quite unfortunate. I'm not the only one to say this, because there's a friend of mine who's a sound engineer. He says the same thing about people studying sound engineering. It's like, well, what do they do? Because if they got an idea that they're going to walk into a recording studio and get a job, there is no career path, which is one of the points, really. Because when we started off, nobody thought there was a career path in music. Because if somebody said, well, I'm going into a career, even the idea of a career in music was a bit laughable. It's like, well, there is no career in music.
Yeah. As my mate says, yeah, you're still doing that old music, are you? Still doing that old music stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What's your job? What's your daytime job?
Yeah, exactly. What's your proper job?
Yeah.
Used to be the thing. Got to get yourself a proper job. So we've now got a load of people who think their proper job is playing the guitar or playing the drums. That is a bit. They're coming out of college. I think that's actually quite tricky, because if you're an entrepreneur, you haven't got a proper job. You're just looking for an opportunity to make money. And this is, I think, closer to what it is to be a musician, is actually spotting the opportunity that's where the gig is, or that's where, there's a project that can be done, you can be involved in, or you're going to start that project because you see an opening. I'm just wondering where those openings are. And maybe we might not be best placed now.
No.
Because it may be for people to be able to spot those, but it is a mindset thing. And unfortunately, I don't think the colleges fulfil that. I'm sticking my neck out here because...
Well, you're probably more informed about it than me because of your teaching work, but...
Unless somebody teaches how to be an entrepreneur, instead of like, this is what a record company does, and this is your... No, that's not being an entrepreneur. That's you creating something out of nothing and seeing an opportunity. And again, how do you put that down as a sort of a lesson plan on a college course? It's a bit sort of, but I think that's nearer to what we need to make things happen. Because you've got to create that buzz for somebody who's got money to go, hang on a minute, if there is a record company involvement, they want to see something happening.
I think the missing ingredient, not missing ingredient, but the vital ingredient is something that the colleges can't teach, is passion.
Yes.
Because lots of people can want to do a particular job and they can learn to do a particular job, but they're not necessarily driven to do that.
Good point.
Where there's actually nothing else in the world that they could imagine doing.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point.
And that's what happened to me when I started. There was no question in my mind that there was only one thing I wanted to do.
Exactly.
And it was not greeted with a lot of joy by my parents at the time, or by lots of people that I knew. It seemed like probably a ridiculous idea.
Yes.
And actually now, as you say, with a glut of very educated musicians, in a way, it seems, for a different reason, it seems like just as much a ridiculous idea.
Exactly.
And the people that are going to rise through that are the ones that care the most about it.
That is true. And you can see that in lots of other things. Actors.
Yeah.
Right? The actors who think there is nothing else that I either A, can do or want to do. Right? When you have those sort of people, they're the ones who will, because they're driven. Music was like that because it was so ridiculous to think that you could survive playing drums or guitar or bass or being a singer. You had to be driven to do that.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how much you were being told it was ridiculous. That, in fact, made you even more passionate.
Yeah,
is that not?
Yes, it was true.
Yeah, exactly. And that was exactly my experience. As soon as somebody said you couldn't possibly do that, that was the complete reason why I should do it. Because I wanted to prove somebody wrong. You had to be bloody minded. And you still have to be bloody minded. But we've now got the opposite, where it seems that we can do that. We've got this sort of can-do culture, right? But it's not really backed up with anything, because the people that are making the money out of all of this, the people running the courses in the colleges, right? They're the ones who are making the money out of it.
Yeah, I suppose.
And it's not just to do with music, because it's to do with anything. So anywhere that there's a college course doing something like, whatever it is, massage, aromatherapy, or whatever, it's like, well, it's the same thing. Those people who are making a living on their own, by their own skill. Okay, we've been talking about music, but it could equally be an artist. It could equally be a break dancer. Literally anything where it's somebody on their own who's going to do something. Somebody doing massage, somebody doing whatever.
Yeah.
If you've got the illusion that there is a path there, it's not.
There's nothing. There isn't a path.
No.
You can follow.
No, you've got to make your own.
You've got to make your own.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite little sayings is, "I've suffered for my art. Now it's your turn."
Yeah. Well, exactly. That is the thing. You've got to not regret anything. You play and it's your experience, and they've got to put up with it, type of thing. Now, obviously, if people are going to come to see you, there's got to be something in it for them. But the in it for them thing is that experience.
Yeah, it's the emotional connection.
It is the emotional connection, and I think that's another thing that's really important, because we've spoken about this before, but all the bands in the past, you bought a record of them and you were part of their club. And that's certainly true with bands as late as Oasis and Blur and all the rest of it. You bought that album and you were part of that club, right? So that's true of the Beatles, the Stones and the rest of it. Nowadays, if people don't even know what they're listening to, they're not part of any club, are they? They're not.
They might subscribe to a genre.
Yes.
Which is...
Yes, they're subscribed to a genre, but that is an amorphous thing. You've got to subscribe to a group of people, which we would have called a band or an artist. There is something about that following of somebody. There's a psychological thing there, where you are their follower. It's very odd, this stuff, psychologically. But if you think about the great musicians that you would look up to and go like, oh my goodness, that's so-and-so.
Yeah.
there was a reverence.
Oh, yeah, huge, yeah.
And that is part of the psychology of why we are drawn to certain types of art. You know, you think about great artists that you think, oh, I really like so-and-so's art. You don't think that they're ordinary people. I mean, they are ordinary people, but you don't think that they're ordinary people. You know, whether it's a Frida Kahlo or, you know, a Picasso or whatever. They sort of seem superhuman.
Yeah.
So there is something in that, and I think when you're saying about you performing to an audience and giving of yourself, that's part of that process that, you know, people either believe in you or they don't. And you enrich their lives by your performance, or you don't. Well, that's how it works, isn't it? You're either their follower, you know, they've got to follow you, or they're not. But it shouldn't be a case of that people just sort of, you're playing and it's just something going on in the background, like a little bit of background music, which is generally what's happening with the whole idea of music being streamed and all the rest of it. It's like it's almost meaningless.
Mm.
There's no investment in the person that's producing the music.
No. I think another side issue to this is, coming from a kind of rock background, is that when I used to go and see bands when I was younger, when the band was playing, there was no way you were going to do anything else, because you couldn't.
No.
Because the music was at a certain volume that, you know, that's you were enveloped in it.
Exactly.
Now with the way a lot of the pubs and things are,
Yep.
where actually, you know, they almost want to have a volume control behind the bar where they can turn you down to sort of a listening background level. I think that's, nobody wants to damage anyone's hearing.
No.
But I think a lot of the venues have come to view the music as a backdrop rather than
Yes.
a thing for its own, in its own
Yes.
sake, and so they don't really want to be enveloped in
No.
in a whole bar full of
No.
wailing guitars and throbbing drums. They don't really want that. Whereas at one time that was part of
That
the
was
experience.
that was definitely part of it, and I think that is an important aspect. No, we don't want to damage people's hearing. However, it's almost like an initiation, right? Music, going to see a live band, because you don't know what's going to happen to you, right? Almost to the point you don't even know if you're going to get out of that venue in one piece. You know what I mean? We've both been in venues like that, I'm sure, right? But it is almost that type of thing that you don't know where you're going with this thing. That's why I say it's more like an initiation. And the fact that, you know, music can be so loud that you cannot do anything else but be completely overwhelmed by it, I think is an important point. And not only that, the experience of watching the people on the stage is that as well. You're overwhelmed by them, because they're raised above you. Let's face it, they're on a stage, or they're in a, you know, there are lights on them and stuff, so they don't seem normal. They're not like everyone else.
No,
You
well,
know-
they probably aren't like everyone else.
Well, no, but you know what I mean. And I think all of that stuff needs to be thought about, and it's not about what we intellectualise as being. the
No,
thing.
so it's wrapping it up in a way, not to finish our conversation, but just this idea is that the music has to be to really grab people now.
Yes.
I think musicians need to formulate something where they're not just playing the notes. They're actually expressing themselves in an environment that is both sonically and visually different to anything that the audience can find
Anywhere else. Exactly. That's a really good point, and actually that does sort of wrap up what we're saying. That, you know, you do get those experiences if you went to the theatre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a case that this can't happen. It's just the fact that the pressure on you places like pubs and stuff like that is that you don't do that.
Yeah, it makes it very hard to.
It's very difficult for them. It's not their fault.
No.
It's just the fact that there's all this legislation about stuff, and noise and everything. But it's really important that we can have some places that you can go, this is a live music venue.
Yeah.
And
those people that are involved in finding and putting on those bands need to have as much passion as the bands.
Exactly. Well, that was brilliant. So we had a couple of interruptions, but I think we're good. We didn't expect people to be wandering around the rest of the building, but there we go. So it was all good.
Well,
thanks for that, Joe.
It's a pleasure. I hope there was some
there's a lot
granules of something useful amongst all my waffle.
All right then. So it's good to see you.
All right.
Cheers, mate.